My name is Rachel Lewis. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 8 years, I dedicated my life to a company that I thought I would retire from. I wasn't just an employee, I was integral to the company's growth, a key player in its success. I was proud of what we built together. I worked long hours, made countless sacrifices, and pushed myself to the limit because I believed in the mission, in the people, and in the future we were creating. But everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I had earned, was shattered in an instant. It happened on a Monday afternoon, an ordinary day that was anything but. I received a message from the CEO, Thomas Reed, asking me to join him for lunch. At first, I didn't think much of it. We'd had plenty of one-on-one lunches before, usually just a casual check-in about the company's progress or brainstorming new ideas for upcoming projects. But something felt different this time. There was a tension in the air I couldn't shake, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. When I walked into the restaurant, Thomas was already there, seated at a quiet corner booth, his back straight, his demeanor unusually formal. I took my seat across from him, a slight sense of unease rising in my chest. We exchanged pleasantries, but the conversation felt strained. As we looked over the menus, I noticed that Thomas wasn't eating like he normally would. He was picking at his food, barely touching it. His eyes darted nervously, and I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. "You wanted to meet in person," I said, trying to break the ice. "Is something wrong? Is everything okay at the office?" Thomas put his fork down and looked at me with a serious expression, one that made my heart skip a beat. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to say what was coming next. "Rachel," he began, his voice tight, "I've asked you here because we need to talk about some changes. There's been a decision made at the top that affects your position with the company." I felt the air leave my lungs. My mind started to race as I tried to process his words, but I couldn't make sense of it. What did he mean by changes? My heart started to beat faster. There had been whispers of restructuring in the company, but I didn't think they would impact me. Not after all I had done. "Rachel, we've decided to go in a different direction," Thomas continued, his eyes avoiding mine. "We're letting you go. Effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating any sense of reality. I blinked, trying to process it, but it felt as though the room was spinning around me. I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. My breath caught in my throat. "You're letting me go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, unable to keep the disbelief out of my tone. "But, why? I've been with the company for 8 years. I've put my heart and soul into this place." Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I know, Rachel. You've done a lot for the company, and we appreciate that. But there's someone else coming in to take your place. The owner's nephew, Ben, is being brought on as your replacement. We've been planning this for a while now." A wave of shock washed over me as the words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The owner's nephew? I had seen Ben around the office from time to time, but I never imagined this. Never once did I think the company would replace me with someone who had barely been involved in any of the day-to-day operations. Someone who didn't understand the intricacies of the business like I did. Someone who had no idea what it meant to work hard for the company's success. "You're replacing me with him?" I asked, my voice now steady, though every word tasted bitter. "You're firing me for someone with no experience?" Thomas looked at me, his expression sympathetic, but there was a certain coldness in his eyes. "It's a business decision, Rachel." "I'm sorry." I didn't know how to respond. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to scream at him, but instead, I just nodded. In that moment, I realized that everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about hard work, was a lie. Ben was coming in, the nephew of the owner, and he was going to take everything I had worked for. He would take my office, my projects, and my future with the company. All the late nights, all the extra effort, all the sacrifices, it was as if none of it mattered. I stood up from the table, trying to keep my composure. "I'll gather my things," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll go. But let me make one thing clear, this is not the end for me. You'll see that. You'll regret this decision. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, but inside, I felt shattered. I had been loyal, I had given everything to this company, and this is how they repaid me. By letting me go without a second thought, replacing me with someone who was only there because of his last name. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. As I walked out of that restaurant, the cool air hitting my face did little to soothe the fire burning inside me. I could feel my hands trembling, not with fear but with a quiet rage. I had been blindsided, betrayed by a company I had given my life to, by a man I had trusted for years. My boss, the one who had promised growth, loyalty, and advancement, had just handed my entire career over to someone else, a relative with no real experience, someone who had done nothing to earn that position. Ben, the owner's nephew, was now in my place, and I had been discarded like I was nothing. It didn't make sense. I had worked hard to earn my position. I had worked late nights, taken on extra responsibilities, solved problems that no one else wanted to touch. I had built relationships with clients, developed strategies, and led teams. I had made this company better, helped it grow, and in return, I had been shown the door, without so much as a second thought. And then, as if to rub salt in the wound, they brought in someone who had no idea what they were doing, just because he shared the same bloodline as the owner. I wasn't just hurt, I was humiliated. The betrayal stung deeply, but there was something else, something sharper, something more dangerous. It was the realization that I had been used, that all my effort, all my years of loyalty, had been nothing more than a stepping stone for someone else to walk over. But as the anger built up inside me, something shifted. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to walk away quietly. This wasn't just about getting fired, it was about showing them that you can't mess with someone and think they won't fight back. And that's when the plan began to form. I spent the next few days in a haze. I tried to process everything, but my mind kept coming back to the same question: how could they do this to me? I needed answers. I needed to make them understand what they had done. I needed them to regret this decision. So I started thinking. What could I do? What would hurt them the most? I knew I had to be careful. Revenge wasn't about making rash decisions or acting out of anger. It was about strategy. It was about making sure that when the dust settled, they would see just how badly they had miscalculated. They thought I would just leave, quietly, with my severance check, and fade into the background. But I had something else in mind, something that would shake them to their core. First, I knew I needed leverage. I had been with the company for years, and over that time, I had become privy to information that no one else knew: financial discrepancies, unethical business practices, and a host of other things that could tarnish the company's reputation. I wasn't just an employee who had been thrown out. I had seen the inner workings, the decisions that were made behind closed doors. I knew where the bodies were buried. And I knew that using that information could bring the company to its knees. But it wasn't just about exposing them publicly. That would be too simple. What I wanted was to hit them where it would hurt the most: their relationships with their clients and partners. The company had always prided itself on its reputation and the trust it had built over the years. I knew that the moment people started questioning that trust, things would start to unravel. So, I began to formulate a plan to do just that. I started by gathering everything I could: emails, contracts, financial reports. Anything that could be used to show the gaps between what the company presented to the public and what was actually happening behind the scenes. I reached out to a few former colleagues who had left the company under similar circumstances, people who had seen the same things I had. They were hesitant at first, but when I mentioned that I had information that could ruin the company's reputation, they were eager to help. Together, we compiled everything. The shady contracts, the client deals that had been deliberately mismanaged, the promises made to investors that had never been kept. We even found evidence of falsified reports that had been used to hide the company's financial struggles. It was enough to bring the entire operation down, if it ever got into the wrong hands. But I wasn't going to just release everything at once. No, I needed to be more calculated than that. This was going to be a slow burn. The next step was to find the right time to strike. I needed to get the information into the hands of the right people, the investors, the clients, the board members who would be forced to act once they knew the truth. I wasn't just doing this to hurt the company, I was doing this to show them that they couldn't treat people like disposable assets. They had made a decision, and I was going to make sure they regretted it. I sent anonymous emails to key clients and partners, subtly hinting at some of the practices I had uncovered. I didn't give them everything right away, just enough to make them curious, just enough to plant the seed of doubt. I knew that once they started asking questions, the company would be forced to react. The lies would start to unravel. I also reached out to a few journalists I had worked with over the years. I told them that I had information that could impact the company's future and gave them a few key details. They didn't know who I was, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't need the credit for exposing them. I just needed to make sure it happened. The response came quicker than I expected. Within a few days, whispers started circulating among the clients, and soon after, I saw the ripple effect. The investors were calling, asking questions, demanding answers. The company's PR team was scrambling to put out fires, but it was already too late. The damage had been done. As the media began to catch wind of the story, it snowballed into something much bigger than I could have anticipated. It wasn't just about what I had exposed, it was about the people who had begun to question everything they had believed about the company. Their trust had been broken, and it wasn't something they could easily repair. And then, just when I thought the company's situation couldn't get worse, I received an email from a former employee who had worked in the legal department. They had gotten wind of the investigation and, having experienced similar unethical practices during their time with the company, decided to leak more information to the press. It was like a dam had broken, and the truth came pouring out. The CEO, Thomas Reed, started to panic. The board of directors called emergency meetings, but they were too far behind. The clients were pulling out, the investors were demanding their money back, and the media was having a field day. The company that had once been a leader in the industry was now scrambling to survive. And in the middle of it all, Ben, the owner's nephew, was thrust into the spotlight, completely unprepared for the chaos that was unfolding. It didn't take long for the media to catch on to the fact that he had been placed in my role without any real qualifications. I watched, with a quiet satisfaction, as the walls began to close in around them. They thought they could get rid of me without consequences. They thought they could just replace me with someone who had no experience. But they hadn't realized the power of a person who's been wronged. They hadn't realized that I wasn't just a cog in their machine. I was a force, and they were about to feel the full impact of underestimating me. As the company continued to unravel, I knew my revenge had been complete. I wasn't just sitting back and watching them crumble, I had caused it. But as the dust settled, I realized something. The satisfaction of watching them fall wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. The real power wasn't in their destruction, it was in my own transformation. I had turned a moment of betrayal into an opportunity for growth, for empowerment. I had taken back control, not just of my career, but of my life. I had shown them that they couldn't simply discard someone like me. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. And with that, I walked away from it all, not as the woman they had tried to cast aside, but as someone who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about empowerment. And in the end, that's the greatest victory of all. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and outcomes, a strange mixture of satisfaction and calm, as I watched the company I had poured so much of my life into slowly crumble under the weight of its own greed and neglect. Every morning, I would wake up to news alerts, emails, and calls from former colleagues, some of whom had become allies without even realizing it. They saw the storm forming, and they wanted in. The first sign that things were truly beginning to unravel came when the CEO, Thomas Reed, publicly announced the resignation of several board members. His carefully crafted facade of calm was quickly deteriorating, but what I found most fascinating was how, despite the chaos, he still tried to cling to control. He started issuing statements, telling the press that everything was under control, that the company was in a transition phase and would come out stronger. But it was too late. The lies had already been exposed. I continued to work in the shadows, orchestrating the next phase of my plan. The information I had sent to the clients had done its damage. The calls kept coming in, one by one. Companies pulled their contracts, each citing a loss of trust in the company's leadership and financial stability. The final straw came when one of our largest clients publicly severed ties, citing the deep-rooted ethical concerns in the way the company had been operating. The headline in the trade publications read, "Company in freefall after shocking allegations of fraud and mismanagement." I didn't even need to read the article. I knew exactly how it would unfold. But it wasn't just the clients pulling out, it was the investors. They were looking for a way out, and the moment they began to get wind of the internal issues, the foundation started to crack. They were furious. The shareholders were breathing down the CEO's neck, demanding answers. With each passing day, more of the company's financial documents were leaked, revealing everything from inflated sales numbers to undisclosed debts. What had once been a sleek, confident business machine was now a broken, bleeding entity, and I wasn't about to let up. I had already anticipated that they would try to find some way to shut me down, to spin the story in a way that would protect them. But I had covered my bases. The journalists I had reached out to were hungry for more, and the momentum continued to build. No matter how hard they tried to dismiss the story, the truth was out, and the public wasn't willing to forget. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. It was on a Friday afternoon, after everything had started to hit its peak. I received a call from an old contact at the company. A whistleblower, someone who had worked in HR, had just come forward with more explosive information. This time, it was personal. The owner's nephew, Ben, who had taken my place, had been involved in a financial scheme that involved falsifying employee bonuses, misappropriating company funds, and covering up incidents of workplace misconduct. It wasn't just incompetence, it was outright fraud. And now, it was in the hands of the press. I didn't hesitate. I knew this would be the final blow. I sent out the final round of carefully drafted emails, anonymous, of course, to key journalists, board members, and some of the company's largest investors. This was my checkmate. The information hit the media just as the stock market closed, causing a sudden drop in value the likes of which the company hadn't seen in years. As the news spread, their stock plummeted, and the company's reputation was forever tarnished. It was a surreal moment, watching everything unfold as I sat back and listened to the chaos erupt. Thomas Reed was scrambling to make damage control statements, trying to convince investors that this was just an isolated incident, but no one was buying it anymore. The calls from the board came in rapid succession, each one more frantic than the last. But I knew it was too late. The pieces had already fallen into place. Then came the inevitable fallout. Ben was fired. I watched as his name was dragged through the mud, his incompetence and corruption laid bare for everyone to see. He had been the golden child, the heir to the throne, but now he was nothing more than a figure of ridicule. The press had a field day with his missteps, and the company's leaders quickly disowned him, claiming that they were unaware of his actions. But I knew the truth. They all knew, and they had all turned a blind eye, until it was too late. For me, it was a moment of both satisfaction and release. I didn't feel joy in watching them suffer. I didn't want them to lose everything, but I wanted them to learn that they couldn't just trample on someone's life and walk away without consequences. I had taken my power back, not by brute force, but by showing them that the truth always comes out, no matter how hard they try to bury it. As the dust began to settle, I took a step back and reflected on what had happened. The company I had once devoted my life to was gone, at least in the form it had once been. I had lost my job, my position, and my future there. But in the process, I had gained so much more. I had reclaimed my dignity, my sense of self-worth, and my power. I had shown them that no one, no matter how high they were on the corporate ladder, could get away with treating others like disposable assets. Looking back, the act of revenge wasn't as sweet as I expected. There was no satisfaction in watching them crumble. The real victory was in the control I had taken of my own life. The real power came from standing up for myself and making sure that no one could ever dismiss me again. I had spent years putting my heart and soul into that company, but now I understood that my worth wasn't tied to that place. My worth was in who I was, in my ability to rise after being knocked down, and in the strength to fight for what I deserved. As I moved forward into the next chapter of my life, I realized something. Revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about building yourself back up when they try to tear you down. The greatest revenge isn't in watching someone else suffer, it's in showing them that you are unstoppable, no matter what they do. To anyone who's been wronged, to anyone who feels like they've been cast aside, I want you to know this: you are not defined by the actions of others. You have the power to rise. You can take what you've learned from the pain, from the betrayal, and turn it into something stronger, something greater. And when you do, the world won't be able to ignore you. I may have lost everything I thought I wanted, but in the end, I gained something far more valuable: my freedom, my strength, and the knowledge that no one could ever break me again. That's the true power of revenge. The weeks after the collapse of the company were a mixture of chaos and quiet satisfaction. I watched from the sidelines, witnessing the people who had betrayed me scrambling to pick up the pieces of their shattered empire. But as the dust settled, it wasn't the sight of their downfall that kept me up at night. It was the realization that I had created something for myself that they could never take away. The calls I received from former colleagues, some still loyal to me, served as a reminder of what I had left behind. They'd seen it all. They had witnessed the unrelenting hours, the dedication, the passion I poured into my work, and they were just as disillusioned as I had been. Many of them had already moved on, some quietly, others with their own fire and vengeance in their hearts. And then there were those who had stood by me, quietly watching the storm from a distance. They knew what had happened, and they knew how I had been wronged. But they also knew the power in standing tall after the fall. I couldn't help but smile as I read messages from former clients, some of whom had stayed with me even after the company's reputation crumbled. They had seen through the facade, and they knew the real reason for the chaos. In those words of appreciation, I found something that gave me peace. I had been right all along. And now, I was standing at the edge of something new. I wasn't the woman who had been discarded. I wasn't the woman who had been told she was no longer needed. No, I was the woman who had turned that betrayal into something far more powerful. I had become the person I needed to be, not defined by the company I had worked for, but by my own strength, my own decisions. As I sat back in my new office, looking out at the cityscape, I realized that the real victory had come from within. The revenge I had taken wasn't about dismantling a company, it was about rebuilding myself. It wasn't about the destruction of others, it was about the creation of my own path, one that would never again be tied to anyone's expectations or mistakes. This journey had taught me something I would carry with me forever: the people who try to break you, who think they can discard you, will never be able to take your power if you refuse to give it up. I had turned a moment of betrayal into my own victory, and no one, not even the company that tried to destroy me, could ever take that away. So to anyone listening this, anyone who has been let down, dismissed, or cast aside, your story is still being written. No one has the power to define you unless you let them. Take control of your narrative, rise from the ashes of what others have tried to burn down, and show the world who you really are. Because the real revenge, the sweetest revenge, is not in their downfall, it's in your rise. And that's a victory no one can ever take away from you.